Dave with Mile High Campers coming back at you again with another video. Today I'm going to be showing you step by step how I installed a Superlift 2.5-inch lift kit for a 2011 to 2016 Ford f250 and f350. You are going to want to watch this video in its entirety because at the end I will show you a comparison of measurements before and after the installation, as well as a comparison of 3 different tire sizes and 2 different wheel sizes. As always guys, the link for this kit will be in the description below. Be sure to check out our other links to our website as well. Now guys, I'm not a certified mechanic. I'm not telling you this is the only way to do this installation or my way's the right way. I'm just sharing my experience and how I was able to do it. And if you get something out of it, great. If not, no big deal. I don't want to waste any more of your time, so let's get into it. First step is to block the rear wheels. Okay guys, so the first step here was to get the truck jacked up. But I lowered it onto some jack stands, and the jack stands are on the frame. And they're 6-ton jack stands, so they should be plenty. Okay, now that I've got the wheels off of both sides, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what I'm about to do, and then I'll show you each step. I need to lower the front axle to get the spring out. In order to do that without breaking the brake line, I'm going to have to remove this bolt to loosen the brake line, and then I'm going to need to remove this bolt from this bracket for the brake line. This bolt here will need to be removed as well. Back here, there's 2 bolts that are holding on the wheel sensor that may need to be removed. Then, of course, we will need to remove the 2 bolts for the shocks. We just want to remove anything here that may get hung up or prevent us from lowering the axle all the way, and we need to do this on both the driver and the passenger side. Okay guys, we're going to start with this 8mm bolt here for the brake line. Okay, we've got this loose. In order to pull it out, we're going to have to remove this bolt and pop that off. So for now, we'll just leave it like that. Alright guys, so in order to get this tie rod in bolt off, I'm having to use an 8mm wrench and an 18mm wrench. Put the 18mm on, and then I'm having to put the 8mm on top like so in order to hold it. Alright, once we remove the bolt from both sides, this should just lift right up. And we can kind of keep it out of the way. Now we can just pull our lower brake line bracket back, and it's free now. Alright, to get the lower shock bolt out, we're going to be using an 18mm socket. Okay, when we pulled that bolt out, this is what it looked like. Here you can see where that strut mount nut comes out of the bottom. So it's positioned in there like this with the nut at the top. Here's another angle of it from underneath. And here you can actually see it move when I back the bolt out. Alright, now we're on the other side of the spring here, and we're going to be removing this bolt here and this bolt here. They're both 8mm. That's going to remove the wheel sensor and allow us to have some play there. And then moving down the frame toward the back of the truck, we're going to be removing this plastic clip here as well as this plastic clip here. That should give us enough play with the brake lines and speed sensor wire. And we're going to need to do this on both sides before we lower the axle. Alright, now we're just going to use our clip tool. We've got one more back here for the brake line. Okay. Alright, now all of our lines should be loose enough to where we have plenty of play to lower the axle. Again, you're going to want to do this on both sides before you lower the axle. And then real quick here guys, on the passenger side of the truck, we didn't have that 3rd clip for the brake line, so it was just the 2 going along the control arm. Now we have everything disconnected on both the driver and the passenger side, except for the upper strut mount bolt, as we will be removing those and the struts after we lower the axle. It is important to make note how your spring is sitting on the lower spring rest, because it will need to go back in exactly how it came out. In my case, you can see that the end of the spring is on the side towards the back of the truck. Make sure none of your lines are getting snagged. Everything looks good so far. Lines are still good, the shock just came out. Alright, hopefully you can see that. It looks like the top of the spring popped out. So we've got it down, I believe, far enough. May need to go down just a little bit more. and the spring simply comes out just like that. On the lower spring mount, you can see that there's actually a stop for the spring, so that is very convenient. That's going to help us line that spring back up on the bottom. Once the spring's out, we can start taking off our shock. So I'm going to be using a 21mm for the top and a 13/16 for the bottom. This is the factory shock on here. Just a fair warning here, guys, this top shock bolt is a nightmare to get off. I actually had to use some penetrating oil. Okay. Now we're going to be using a 13mm socket to remove this upper mount for the brake line. Looking at the top of the spring here, guys, what we're going to want to do is insert the spacer like so, and then the isolator is going to go on top like this. Next, I'm going to move the upper portion of the spring into place. And I'm doing this on both the passenger and the driver's side. And this is the little more tricky part where we've got to make sure our spring aligns with its little bump stop there. I think what I'm going to have to do is slowly start raising the axle back up so that I can position the spring better. Using the floor jack, I raised the axle up, then I came over and checked the spring, made sure that none of the brake lines or anything like that was getting tangled. I was able to twist the spring better into place, and I'm doing this on both the passenger and the driver's side. And then I'm just going to continue this process slowly moving forward. Here you can see the bottom of the spring. I was able to get it right up against that bump stop, so it's right where it needs to be, and I did this on both the passenger and driver's side. As you can see here at the top of the spring, everything is fitting nicely. Once again, I've done this both on the driver and passenger side. Now we can get into reinstalling the front struts. Now I'm going to be installing the top of the struts first on both sides. And as you can see here on these particular struts, I've got a metal washer, then I've got a rubber spacer, and then we've got another rubber spacer, metal washer, and then the nut. I just have it snug. I don't have it tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and set the bottom of the strut. All right, now that the bottom's in place, I'm going to go ahead and tighten the top. We're just going to use the 8mm up top and then use our 3/4 inch wrench to tighten. Alright, so we've got that bolt tightened down now as far as it'll go. Here I'm using a screwdriver to help align the holes. As described earlier, I'm going up through the bottom here with the nut, and then I'm going to try to thread the bolt on. Alright, as always guys, be sure to do your own research when it comes to these torque specs, but what I did find for this is a torque spec of 110 foot-pounds, so that's what I'm going to go with. I trust that source, but be sure to do your own research on that. And I'm doing this on both the passenger and the driver's side. Alright, now we're going to put our upper brake line mount back in. Once again, we're using a 13mm socket. Alright, next we're going to put our lower brake line bracket back on, and one thing you may have to do is jack up the axle a little bit so that it gives some slack back to the line, because it is going to be a pretty tight fit, it looks like. And this is where that lower brake line relocation mount that comes with some other kits may be a good idea, because that does put some strain on that brake line. Alright, now we're going to get our wheel speed sensor mount back in, and we're again using an 8mm socket here. Okay, as you can see, we got our clips in back here on the control arm. The third clip, this guy, it was causing a real stretch in the line to try to bring it down back to where it was clipped on. I just kind of zip tied it right here, and I think that'll work. And then we've got some slack back here. Okay, now I'm going to reattach the tie rod, and keep in mind that I'm doing all these steps on both the driver and passenger side. Now we've got the sway bar reattached on both sides. Everything's all connected. All that's left to do is reattach the wheels. Alright, first things first here, guys. I got the front wheels blocked. I then jacked the truck up and lowered it onto 6-ton jack stands. I've got them positioned here on the leaf spring. Then I've got a second set of jack stands here in the back that are on the hitch, just for safety purposes. And then I've got the floor jack underneath the axle. Alright, so the first step, I'm going to get these little clips off of the U-bolts, and they're going to be on both sides. I believe they're holding the wheel sensor down. Alright, next we're going to use a 15/16 socket to get these nuts off. Once I get the U-bolts removed here from the driver's side, I'm going to go ahead and go through the same steps on the passenger side. Alright, next up we're going to be using a 15mm wrench and an 18mm socket to get the lower shock off. And I'm doing this on both the passenger and the driver's side. If we follow the shock all the way to the top, we've got a nut up here that we've got to take off. It's an 18 millimeter. We're doing that only because we're replacing the shocks. If you're just adding the block kit, you do not need to take the shocks all the way off, just the lower bolt. So we're gonna go ahead and get that guy off now. And I'm doing this on both the passenger and the driver's side. All right, now the moment of truth. We're gonna lower this axle and see if we can get enough clearance to add the block. Now real quick here guys, we want to go around the truck again, double check to make sure our jack stands look good before we even attempt to think about getting under this thing. Installing the 2-inch block ended up being more tricky than I thought, so I was unable to get the driver's side on video, but I did get the passenger side on video. But before we move on to that, let me give you an overview of what I had to do. Make sure you have the front wheels blocked both in front and behind the front tires, because the emergency brake needs to be off in order to relieve the tension as you bring the rear axle down. You may have to raise and lower the axle several times with the jack to finesse the block to line up correctly. Quick note, the 2-inch block is tapered, so the taller end needs to go toward the back and the shorter end needs to go toward the front. I also had to use a ratchet strap that was attached to the axle and the rear hitch to pull the axle toward the back of the truck, as after lowering it, the axle moved forward, so I needed to move it back into the correct position, and I was able to do that with the ratchet strap. But at this point, I have got everything lined up and fitting correctly on the driver's side. So now I'm going to install the new U-bolts and get the lower plate in place and attach the nuts and get them snugged up to hold everything in place. Then I'm going to do the same steps on the passenger side. Now, by all means, my way may not be the best way, may not even be the correct way. I'm just sharing my experience once again, so be sure to do what you're comfortable with. And if there's a better way, by all means, do it that way. This is just how I was able to do it. Again, make sure the taller part of the wedge is in the back, shorter is in the front. And we're going to have to come down some more. So again, I positioned the blocks and slowly raised the jack and tightened the ratchet strap as needed to keep everything aligned. Once I got everything in place, I installed the new U-bolts, lower plate, and just snugged the bolts up, not too tight, just in case there are any other adjustments that we may need to do while installing the shocks. At this point, I have both sides with the blocks and U-bolts installed. Now I will install the shocks on both sides. It's somewhat unfortunate and kind of a pain, but you will have to install the bushings on the new shocks. I used a vise to press them in. Here I have the shock in place on the upper mount, and I will be using an 18 millimeter socket to snug the nut down. I will come back and tighten it down after I install the lower portion of the shock. Now I'm mounting the shock to the lower mount, and I will be using a 15 millimeter and 18 millimeter socket and wrench for the nut and bolt to install the shock to the lower mount. Alright, now we're going to torque this lower bolt to 66 foot-pounds. Now we're going to tighten the upper shock bolt to 52 foot-pounds. Okay, so for our U-bolts, we're going to do a crisscross pattern. We're going to start with this corner first, tighten it a little bit. Then we're going to move to this corner, tighten it a little bit. Back to this corner, tighten it a little bit. And then this corner, tighten a little bit. And continue to do that crisscross pattern until we get them pretty good and cinched down. And then we'll torque them up. And I'm kind of aligning this bottom plate with where I can see it was resting on the axle before. So I know it was kind of in the position where it was from the factory. You could always mark it if you wanted to before you take the stock bolts off. Alright, now that we've got the bolts snugged down, we're going to want to torque them. And according to Superlift, we're going to want to torque them down to 185 foot-pounds. Alright, now let's torque down the other side. Alright, now that we have all of that done for both sides, now we can reattach the wire for the wheel sensors on both sides. Okay, now that we have everything installed except for the wheels, Superlift suggests that you hang the axle and spin the drive shaft to make sure there is no binding. I was able to do this with some help by turning the drums. It may be easier to do this with the wheels on, but I didn't have enough clearance off of the ground to do it that way. Anyway, all is good now and I can install the wheels. Alright, let's take a look at the different tire and wheel sizes. First up is the factory wheel. wheel with a 245/75 17-inch tire, and this is a total diameter of 30.5 inches. Here's a comparison of what the truck looked like before and after the lift with the factory wheels and tires. Before the lift, it had a distance of 10.25 inches between the tire and the bottom of the fender. It had a distance of 13.75 inch from the bottom of the running board to the ground. After the lift, it had a distance of 12.5 inches between the tire and the bottom of the fender, and a distance of 16.5 inches from the bottom of the running board to the ground. For the rear, before the lift, it was 12.5 inches between the tire and the bottom of the fender, and a distance of 22 inches from the bottom of the bed to the ground. After the lift, it was 14.75 inches between the tire and the bottom of the fender, and a distance of 24.25 inches between the bottom of the bed to the ground. Next, let's take a look at these Fuel Assault custom wheels, part number D54620901757. They are a 20-inch by 9-inch wheel with a 20mm offset. I chose these wheels because I was trying to get a wheel close to the size of the factory 20-inch wheel for the f250. Because I didn't want to have to worry about the tire rubbing the fender, I chose to go with these Cooper Discoverer AT3 XLT tires in a 265 by 60/20. This wheel and tire combo will give you a 32.5 inch overall diameter. With the lift, this wheel and tire combo did not even come close to rubbing. Side note, honestly, I was not very impressed with these tires as they only lasted a little over a year before they were bald. Here's a look at the truck before the lift and after the lift with the new tire and wheel combination. Here's a look at the truck post-lift before the new wheels and tires and after the lift with the new wheels and tires. Now we have a distance from the ground to the bottom of the running board of 17.25 inches compared to the 13.75 inch before the lift. On the rear, the distance between the ground and the bottom of the fender is 25 inches compared to the 22 inches before the lift. Next is a comparison with a set of Nitto ridge grapplers sized at 35 by 12.5 R20. This wheel and tire combo has an overall radius of 33.5 inches. This combo has enough clearance with the lift that it does not rub on the fender. Here is a view of the gap between the tire and the fender, and here is a view of how much this wheel and tire combo sticks out past the fender. The distance from the ground to the bottom of the running board with this combo is 18 inches compared to the 13.75 inches before the lift, giving a grand total of a 4.25 inch lift for the front. On the rear, the distance between the ground and the bottom of the fender is 25.75 inches compared to the 22 inches before the lift, giving us a grand total of a 3.75 inch lift for the rear. Here's a look at the truck before the lift and after the lift with the Nitto ridge grapplers. Here is a look at the truck with the two different 20-inch tire sizes. Well, that was a mouthful, guys. I hope I covered everything that you may wanted to have known for this project. If you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment. Again, be sure to check out all the information and the links in the description below. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload new videos. Be sure to smash that like button, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.